I'm glad to have Craig Coffey with me today. Craig is an ICF credentialed professional certified coach who is differentiated by his 30 plus years of senior experience working for a variety of Fortune 300 companies. He's also a diversity, equity, and inclusion champion. Craig works with his clients to identify, unlock, and grow their talents and skills to achieve career ambitions, as well as build strong teams that deliver inspired results. Craig, I'm so glad to have you with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this, and I have some great questions to ask you around leadership and your executive coaching journey so far. And so if that's all right, I'm just going to jump right in.
No, that's great. You've been a big part of my coaching experience. So I'm happy to do this.
Well, I'm thrilled to have this time with you. So my first question is this. You've had a successful career as a chief marketing officer for some of the biggest names in business, household names. Why did you give that up to become an executive coach?
For me, I've always led teams. When I was on the corporate side, I always led teams through a servant leadership approach, a servant leadership platform where, to summarize that, it's not that I felt like my employees worked for me. I actually felt like I worked for them. And my job was to remove their obstacles. My job was to enable them. My job was to empower them. And when I started to think about the next kind of chapter in my career, to me, executive coaching felt like a natural next step. I've always believed in developing talent, trying to help my talent get to whatever their goals happen to be. So when I thought about leaving the corporate side, this was always kind of in the back of my head of an executive coach being able to continue that thought of servant leadership, but just probably reframe it in a slightly different way.
And I know that it has reinvigorated your energy for your career to be working with leaders in a whole new capacity.
Yeah, it absolutely has. It's amazing, and you'll hear me use this expression reframe often, but it's amazing how a slight little twist of what you used to do, but just doing it from a slightly different perspective, it does just provide a new level of energy and excitement.
So you've already attained a certain level of success getting into Fortune 200 companies. Many coaches would love to get into that space. What tips can you give to other coaches who'd like to do so?
Yeah, so for me, returning back into corporate America, but as an external resource, felt very natural for me. It's where I grew up. I spent 30 plus years in corporate America. I was accustomed to navigating what large corporations, how they operate, how they think about things. But I would say the biggest tip I could provide is really knowing what value you are going to bring. You have to be very clear on what your value proposition is, how you are going to think about delivering that value to clients, and being able to kind of say that and share that in a very concise way that it's immediately compelling to them to understand that. So to me, that is the most important thing, is to not only have a niche, which we all have our niche, but to be able to demonstrate what is your value so that, these are very busy people. Being able to kind of really, thread the needle on what that thing is that is your value is, I think, the most important.
I can absolutely see that. And having a niche helps to make that value more clearer to certain people. Now, you've established a niche coaching people in your former line of work. This means you know their jobs inside and out. How have you been able to stay in the role of a coach and not stray into the areas of mentoring or training your clients? I'm keenly interested in knowing about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So as a former chief marketing officer and general manager, I wanted to make sure I never kind of leapt into that space at all. And you know what? I haven't been struggling with it in any way, shape, or form. And I'll tell you for two reasons. One, I never wanted to be that backseat driver who said things like, oh, well, when I was in your job, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's sort of like what our parents used to say to us about, well, when I was your age, blah, blah, blah. And it just kind of, you zone out when you hear your parents say those kinds of things. I never wanted to be that person. But the second thing that's probably the more compelling answer to all of that is, what may have worked for me when I was in those roles, it's not even applicable. It's irrelevant, in fact. What may have worked for me was a different set of circumstances. I'm a completely different person than any of my clients. So, I think it's important that they arrive to their own conclusions. I think it's important that they arrive to their own insights and their own solutions in all of this. So my job is to just help them unlock those things. But if I spent my time in a consultative manner telling people what to do, I just think it would be a disservice to my coaches, a disservice to what I'm trying to do. So I never even feel compelled to go down that path of do this, don't do that. It's just not of value in any way.
I absolutely agree with everything that you've said. I think one thing that I want to pull out is that it wasn't who you were when you were a CMO. You weren't likely to tell people what to do versus encourage them to seek their own solutions too. Is that right?
Yeah, no, it is right. And I think the other thing that's, and you know this better than anybody, I think the other thing that's really unique about the clients we have the great blessing and benefit to work with is they're all really good at their functional expertise. They're good at the what they do. It's usually the how they do it that may trip them up. So me spending time trying to help a CMO or general manager be a better CMO or general manager in their functional expertise is just not really helpful because they're already excelling at that. But helping them in the how they do their job is the piece that I think is the areas that trip people up. How do they influence? How do they interact with people? How do they engage their teams? How do they resolve conflict? How do they manage ego? How do they do all of those kinds of things that are the softer skills that often can trip people up in their career progression? So,
yeah, so true. Now, you touched on this a little bit earlier by saying that to work with people in Fortune 200 companies, you have to have a strong value proposition, understand that they're very busy. But I want to dig into that a little bit more, Craig. How is it different coaching leaders in Fortune 200 companies versus leaders in smaller organizations?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is probably an oversimplification, but to me, people are people. If you are a CEO today, at some point in time, you weren't a CEO and you were a junior person sitting in a cubicle, crunching numbers. You had a boss. You were hoping for a raise, trying to work towards a promotion. You may not have even liked your boss. You had conflict with peers. So, whether it is a CEO of a multinational company or a CEO of a small family business, you weren't born into those positions. You grew into those positions, and people are people. So, they've had to kind of learn the skill set, develop the soft skills and the hard skills or rational skills to be able to help them. The analog I like to use, and you might get a kick out of this, I love film, but the analog I like to use is around really famous actors and actresses who didn't just become stars overnight. I think about somebody like Brad Pitt, who was an extra in Brad Pitt was an extra. I'm trying to think of the film. No Way Out, Brad Pitt was an extra in, or Renee Zellweger. She was an extra in Dazed and Confused. Even somebody like Matt Damon and Ben Affleck were extras in The Field of Dreams, that movie. So at some point, they were not starring roles. They didn't get credits in films. They didn't even get paid a lot, but they actually hired a coach to help them be better actors and actresses. And I think it's no different in business. So whether you're a small business leader or a senior business leader, people are people, and we all need coaches. They need coaches to help them get to the next level of their careers.
So then how does that translate into how you actually have your conversations? It sounds like you're talking to them just like regular people as that you might have when they were at lower rungs of the ladder, right? Is that kind of the message that I'm getting?
Yeah, I think that's true. The most senior people still struggle with everyday things. They struggle with certain obstacles, conflicts, limiting beliefs that they may have had about themselves that they continue to carry forward about themselves. And I think the misnomer about really senior people is that they somehow have it all figured out, and that's just not the case. I think often they find that they don't have as many people to talk to, or they may be unwilling to be vulnerable about something that they don't feel they're very good at. So being able to treat them kind of human to human, person to person, and have just a very authentic conversation is a really great place to start. And I don't think that they think of themselves as anything special. They are just trying to get better at what they do and lead their people the best they know how to.
I like that a lot. And I think that your answer is really going to help newer coaches who are intimidated by roles and titles sometimes, that they don't want to go after people in high levels in large companies because they're intimidated by the idea of not being able to coach them. But as you pointed to earlier, it's not about telling them what to do or even truly understanding their function. They're already good at it anyway. It's about talking with them about human problems that we all face at different levels.
That's right. That's right.
So I know you're also very interested in the shift towards leaders needing to have more empathy and emotional intelligence. How have you blended that need into your coaching?
The best way I can kind of talk about that is the relationships that I think a lot of employers used to have with their employees, which was more of a command and control transactional connection, where it is, I need this, I need this report and I need it by next Tuesday. And that was kind of the end of the conversation that an employer would have with his employee, his or her employee. And I think with everything that's gone on, especially these last 18 or 19 months, it really needs to be more of a relational connection. And by relational connection, it is, how do I have the ability to engage with my employees in a way that's not just command and control and give me this by this date, but being able to do check-ins with them. And there's a lot of mistrust that may exist because of all the uncertainty that's out there. So what are you as a leader doing to build trust back in your relationships with your employees? What are you able to do to demonstrate that you really do care in having a dialogue, and it's not a monologue where it's just coming from one person to the other, but you're checking in to hear how are they doing and what do they think and what do they feel in a given situation? You're willing to exhibit some level of vulnerability. There's no leader that I've met that feels like they have a command of everything that's happening. There's just so much change going on. So I've encouraged leaders to say, hey, I don't have all of this figured out yet, and to be a bit vulnerable. And I think their team members really appreciate the fact that not everything is ticked and tied, and some things are still a bit ambiguous, and being able to admit that it's a bit ambiguous. So, that notion of dialogue, that notion of respect, that notion of trust, that notion of being vulnerable are all kind of game changers of bringing a higher EQ into the workplace than probably existed before when it was more command and control.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that. And that's been my experience as well, working with some leaders over the last year and a half. This topic continues to come up in conversations as areas where they need to strengthen their skill set and what they bring to their people. Now, another recent shift is the balance of power, tilting in favor of employees versus employers. You're seeing that in the job market. How do you think leaders need to adjust their styles to recognize and embrace this shift?
Yeah, so I'm going to infer from your question, a lot of what's talked about is kind of the Great Resignation, where a lot of team members have just kind of said, "I'm going to leave." And
Right.
Another maybe oversimplification, but there's kind of two or three buckets I think about. There are some employees that have opted to leave because they are really at this inflection point and they're trying to figure out, who am I? What do I want to do? And there's a coaching opportunity to help those people kind of sort through that. And I think there's many coaches that can be helpful in that process. But there's another bucket of employees where they still want to work for the current employer, they think, but they're not sure where their current employer stands on really important issues like the environment, like diversity, equity, and inclusion, like civil liberties and those kinds of things. And that is one of those where, to answer your question, leaders and companies need to be far more transparent about where they stand on some of these things. The idea of being able to kind of stay out of the fray and, hey, well, we're just a company or we're just a brand, that's not our issue. More and more companies are being pulled into this as consumers become more activist and even employees become more activist. They want to know that the brand they chose as a consumer or the company they chose to work for, they have a shared value in some way, shape, or form. And that's the piece where I think leaders and companies need to be much more transparent and actually have a point of view around some of these really important topical issues, civil issues, environmental issues, diversity and equity and inclusion issues. The company needs to be really clear, and leaders need to be really clear about where they stand on some of those things so that their employees understand that there is some level of shared value system that they have. And I guess the final thing I'll say, Michael, is, and no company is perfect, no employee is perfect, but even if you are working for a company that's not perfect, you're willing to stay if you feel like you have a clear line of sight for growth for yourself and the company, or you have some overlap of values. And there's an old truism about, people don't leave companies, they leave bad managers. And I believe that to be true. Somebody will stay in a situation if they feel like they have a good manager that is an ally for them, supports them, and they have an opportunity to grow. But I would say a lot of what's going on with the Great Resignation may be people just leaving bad managers and going someplace else. And that's an unfortunate thing, but it's an opportunity for leaders to stop and reflect a little bit on, why did I lose that high talent? Why isn't somebody coming here to work, and really assessing what their leadership skills really are.
I think that's a great angle, Craig, that you bring up, that that is still true today, along with a variety of other factors that are causing people to leave. But the fact that people are leaving bad managers. And so that segues me into what is my final question. What about the leaders themselves? So we've talked about employees and why employees leave, and you've touched on what leaders need to do. What are you seeing as the challenges that they're going through, leading through such an unusual time?
Yeah, I think the last 19 months has really changed the relationship between the employer and employee in a way that I don't think anybody could have predicted. And I'll give you an example of that, and then I'll get to the point. The example of that is, we're doing this interview in a remote way, through a video platform. And now that's how people are doing work. And when you think about what an employer now knows about their employee, it's just vastly different. When you think about, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, you didn't know a lot about your employee's personal life. But because of the advent of video platforms, you understand if somebody's spouse has been furloughed or laid off. You understand if they have young kids that are remote learning, or a college kid that's home doing remote learning. You understand if they live in a multi-generational household. You understand what their decorating tastes happen to be. You understand all kinds of things that you just never knew about your employee. And by the way, in turn, they know about you as an employer. So there's a responsibility that comes, I think, as a leader, and this may get to the heart of your question. I think there's a responsibility that comes from the leader's perspective to say, okay, I need to take all that in. And it's why I need to have a more relational relationship or more relational connection with my team members, because there's so much coming at them, because I now see into their home and I understand they may have multiple generations in the household. They may be trying to homeschool children at the same time they're trying to do their job. So my ability to bring some empathy, my ability to bring some understanding, my ability to bring some agility, that we don't have to be so hard and fast on every rules. Yes, results still matter. Yes, we still have deliverables, but we have to just, I think a little bit differently about how we create a culture that manifests itself in this virtual hybrid world. Our secret sauce used to be, well, everybody's in one room. You have to figure out a way to kind of recast what that culture is so that it can work in this kind of hybrid environment, I think.
So that forces me to want to ask one more question, Craig.
Sure.
I said that was my last question, but so my natural thought is, you're working with these leaders, presenting these ideas and these dynamics and this changing environment to them, asking them to consider a different approach to leadership. How are you finding them in the conversation? Are they receptive to it? Are they already on the way and you're helping them to accelerate the shift and think more deeply about it? Like, what has been the response to leaders with these needs?
I think many of them get it. I think many of them started down this path of, hey, we're going to have, everybody do this by this date. But it's hard to predict what's going to happen in a pandemic, right? So I think it's been a little bit of a, well, wait, we have to think about this because there's different circumstances for a lot of different groups of people. So how do we manage those different circumstances? So I think my job is to be a bit of a mirror and reflect some of what's going on, and to help ask challenging questions, and to help push on some things that might have been limiting beliefs or some false assumptions about things, but to really get in touch with their team members to kind of ask and understand what's happening. And I think, many leaders I have the pleasure of working with are interested in kind of learning about that, because they recognize that one false edict that kind of mandates everybody's going to do this can be, a travesty. It can be terrible for the company. And I think the companies are learning that there does need to be some level of agility and some thoughtfulness. And it's not going to be an easy solution. And relying on your team members to help you get some of those answers is what many of them are starting to do.
Well, thank you very much, Craig. I've learned a lot from these conversations that we've had around leadership today, and what they're going through, and the type of leader that they need to be. And I'm just excited for you that you've now moved on in your career journey, and are well on your way to helping so many leaders to navigate these difficult times. And you're able to now branch out beyond. You used to impact one company and one company's leaders, and now you're impacting many companies. And so your effect has grown through the company Waymaker Leadership. So congratulations on the great work that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's really been a great joy. And as I said at the beginning, I've tried to reframe my career. I felt like I had much more to give, and this has been a great opportunity to be a part of some really wonderful companies and be a part of many wonderful leaders and play a role in helping them. So I appreciate it, and appreciate your support in all of this as well. So thank you, Michael.
You're welcome, Craig. Thank you very much for being with us today. It's been a pleasure.
Appreciate it. Thank you.